There's a story Las Vegas tells about itself. It goes like this. A visionary gangster looked out at an empty stretch of Nevada desert and saw something nobody else could see. A city of lights. A glittering capital of vice, built from nothing but nerve and imagination. He built it. He was murdered for it. And the city he created became the most profitable entertainment empire on earth. It is a good story. Almost none of it is true. His name was Benjamin Siegel. He was born on February 28, 1906, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the second of 5 children born to Jewish immigrants who had come to America with very little and had not yet found much more once they arrived. Williamsburg, in this era, was not one neighborhood. It was several, pressed together. Jewish families beside Italian families, beside Irish families, beside Polish and German and Russian families. All of them recently arrived, all of them poor, all of them raising children in a few crowded blocks, where the adults worked exhausting hours for very little money, and the children organized themselves, as children in such places have always organized themselves, into gangs defined by which streets belonged to which families. Adult racketeers moved through this world as a matter of course. Youth gangs were not an aberration. They were simply what boys in Williamsburg did, the same way boys in other places played stickball or delivered newspapers. Benjamin Siegel did both in a sense. He formed his own small gang while still a boy, not yet a teenager, and ran what was, in miniature, a complete protection racket. He and his friends would identify a pushcart peddler on the street. They would threaten, subtly or not so subtly, to destroy the peddler's goods, and then they would offer, for a small weekly fee, to make sure nothing happened to the cart at all. He was the threat and the solution to the threat, packaged together and sold to people too poor to refuse either. He was perhaps 11 years old. By his teenage years, Siegel had expanded his operation across the East River, extorting pushcart vendors on the Lower East Side of Manhattan as well. It was there, in 1918, that he met another boy doing more or less the same thing he was doing. A sharp, quiet, calculating teenager named Meyer Lansky. Lansky would later describe the meeting, in an interview given decades afterward, in terms that have become one of the most quoted lines in the entire history of American organized crime. "I told little Benny that he could be my number 2, Lansky said. He was young but very brave. His big problem was that he was always ready to rush in first and shoot to act without thinking." This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is, in a single sentence, an almost complete description of who Benjamin Siegel would remain for the rest of his life. Brave, impulsive, the kind of person who acts before he calculates the consequences of acting. It would make him an extraordinarily effective young criminal. Decades later, in a Beverly Hills mansion, it would also be the exact quality that got him killed. But that is a long way away. In 1918, he was simply a boy who had found another boy exactly like himself. And together, they decided to stop working for other people's gangs and start running their own. They called it the Bugs and Meyer Mob. It began as a small operation, hijacking liquor shipments from rival bootleggers during Prohibition, then reselling the stolen alcohol themselves. But it grew quickly, in the specific way that criminal enterprises grow during a period when an entire country has just made one of its most popular pastimes illegal and created overnight an enormous and extremely profitable black market for anyone willing to supply it. The Bugs and Meyer Mob became, within a few years, one of the most effective contract killing operations in New York and New Jersey, operating almost a decade before the much more famous organization that would later be known as Murder Incorporated even existed in name. Some of the young men who passed through their orbit in these years would go on to become legends of American organized crime in their own right. Abner "Longy" Zwillman, who would eventually run the rackets across the entire state of New Jersey. Louis "Lepke" Buchalter, who would become the head of Murder, Inc. itself, and who remains, to this day, the only major American mob boss ever formally executed by the state. He died in the electric chair in 1944. Jake Lansky, Meyer's own brother, and a young, ambitious associate named Arthur Flegenheimer, who would shed that name entirely and become known across the rest of his short and violent life as Dutch Schultz. This was the world Benjamin Siegel was raised inside, not on its margins, at its center from the very beginning. In 1931, Siegel was one of 4 men hired to kill Joe the Boss Masseria, a Sicilian crime boss whose death marked one of the defining moments in the violent restructuring of American organized crime, a period of gang warfare that history now refers to as the Castellamarese War. Out of that war came a new, more centralized structure for organized crime in America, a national syndicate engineered substantially by Lucky Luciano, with Lansky as his closest strategic partner. Siegel was not a peripheral figure in this transformation. He was a trusted instrument of it. This is important to establish clearly before we go any further, because everything that happens later in this story, the Hollywood glamour, the desert hotel, the legend of the visionary founder, gets built on top of this foundation. And it is worth remembering, every time the glamour reappears, exactly what foundation it was built on. He was not a businessman who happened to have some rough associates. He was, by the time he was 25 years old, one of the most trusted killers in the most powerful criminal organization in the United States. That is who walked into Hollywood a few years later. In January of 1929, Siegel married his childhood sweetheart, a young woman named Esta Krakauer. They would have 2 daughters together, Millicent, who lived until 2017, and Barbara. We are not going to spend much time on this marriage, and that absence is itself meaningful. Siegel was, by every account that survives him, a chronically unfaithful husband, maintaining multiple relationships throughout his marriage to Esta, with a casualness that suggests he never fully understood, or perhaps never fully cared, what fidelity was supposed to mean. The marriage ended in divorce in 1946, 1 year before his murder, and not coincidentally, around the same period his attention had become consumed entirely by a desert hotel project and a different woman altogether. Esta took their daughters and returned to New York. She does not appear again in this story, which is, in its own way, the most honest thing we can tell you about what kind of life Benjamin Siegel actually built for the people who loved him before he became famous. By the mid-1930s, New York had become a dangerous place for a man like Benjamin Siegel to remain visible. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia had launched an aggressive campaign against organized crime, and the increased scrutiny was making the city both more dangerous and less profitable for high-level mob figures. Siegel himself, by several accounts, had at least a dozen separate contracts out on his own life by this point. The accumulated resentments and rivalries of more than 15 years inside organized crime's most violent circles, all of it catching up to him at once. The syndicate made a decision. Siegel would go west. Whether he wanted to go is a different question entirely. Several accounts describe him as deeply unhappy about the assignment. New York was his home, his power base, the city where his name actually meant something. California was, in 1937, mob territory still being organized, still being built from the ground up, a demotion dressed up as an opportunity. But the alternative, staying in New York with a dozen contracts on his life, made the decision for him. He packed up his family. He boarded a train west. He had no idea yet that this exile would eventually make him famous. Siegel arrived in California in 1937 with a specific assignment: build the syndicate's gambling presence on the West Coast from the ground up. He moved his wife and daughters into a home in Beverly Hills, where they lived almost immediately in a level of luxury that a boy who grew up running a pushcart protection racket in Williamsburg could hardly have imagined a generation earlier. He brought in his own lieutenant, a young, vicious operator named Mickey Cohen, to handle the street-level enforcement that any new territory requires. The existing Los Angeles crime boss, a man named Jack Dragna, did not welcome this arrangement. Dragna had been running Los Angeles's organized crime operations for years before Siegel's arrival, and he was, understandably, less than thrilled to discover that an East Coast transplant had effectively been installed above him. Dragna had no real choice in the matter. Lucky Luciano, by this point already in prison, but still wielding enormous influence over the national syndicate, reportedly sent word directly to Dragna that he had best cooperate. Dragna cooperated. He had little alternative. Siegel, within a remarkably short period of time, had built himself a wire service, a national network for transmitting horse racing results and odds at speed, which bookmakers across the country paid handsomely to access. It made him an enormous amount of money. It also made him, for the first time in his life, something he had never quite been on the streets of Brooklyn: visible, glamorous, almost respectable. We are going to spend the next 4 episodes following Benjamin Siegel from this point. Wealthy, ambitious, newly installed at the top of a criminal operation he did not build, but was sent to claim, through Hollywood, through the deserts of Nevada, through a hotel that nearly bankrupted the entire syndicate, and finally, to a living room in Beverly Hills, where 9 bullets ended his life before he turned 42. Along the way, we are going to dismantle, piece by piece, the mythology that grew up around his death. The mythology says he was a visionary who saw the future of an empty desert. The record says Las Vegas already had casinos before he ever arrived, and that the hotel he is most famous for building was not even his idea. The mythology says he built an empire through sheer force of imagination. The record says he was sent west by men more powerful than himself, installed above a local boss who hated him, and eventually killed by the same organization that had made him. None of this makes Benjamin Siegel less interesting. It makes him more interesting, because the real story, the one we are actually going to tell you, is not about a visionary who built a city. It is about a violent, impulsive, charming, deeply insecure man who spent his entire life trying to become something other than what he actually was, and very nearly succeeded. There is a detail from his childhood that is worth returning to before we close this episode, because it tells you almost everything you need to know about the man this series is about to follow. He was the threat, and he was also the solution to the threat. That structure, manufacture the danger, then sell the protection from it, and collect from both ends of the same transaction, is not just how an 11-year-old boy made pocket money on the streets of Williamsburg. It is, in a more sophisticated form, exactly how he would later operate in Hollywood, charming movie stars while simultaneously extracting money and favors from the same studios that feared him. It is exactly how the entire organized crime syndicate he belonged to operated in Las Vegas, building the very entertainment industry that respectable society would eventually depend on, while quietly controlling it from underneath. The boy who ran the pushcart racket, and the man who would later try to convince Hollywood and Las Vegas, and ultimately the whole country, that he was a visionary entrepreneur, were never two different people. He simply got better costumes as he got older. We should also tell you, before we go any further, about the nickname, Bugsy. It came from his fellow gang members, decades before Las Vegas, decades before Hollywood, a reference to his notoriously quick and violent temper. He was, in the parlance of the streets that produced him, crazy as a bedbug. He hated it. People who actually knew him, the men who worked alongside him, the women who loved him, the handful of friends who remained close to him right up until the night he died, understood a simple, unbreakable rule. You did not call Benjamin Siegel Bugsy to his face. Not if you valued your continued existence. History did not extend him the same courtesy. The nickname outlived him by 80 years. It became the title of a Hollywood film. It became shorthand for an entire mythology he never fully consented to, and, by every account, deeply resented. Even his name, in the end, was something other people built for him without asking. By the time he stepped off that train in 1937, Benjamin Siegel had already lived an entire criminal lifetime. He had run protection rackets before he was a teenager. He had helped found one of the most effective contract killing operations in the history of American organized crime. Before he was old enough to legally drink the alcohol he was bootlegging, he had participated in one of the defining assassinations of the Castellammarese War before he turned 25. He had married, had 2 daughters, and had already begun the long pattern of infidelity that would define his domestic life until its end. None of this required a single moment of vision about deserts or neon lights or the future of American entertainment. It required exactly what Meyer Lansky had identified in him at age 12: bravery without calculation, a willingness to act first and think later. California did not change who Benjamin Siegel was. It simply gave him a much, much bigger stage to perform the same person on. In part 2, we follow him into Hollywood. We are going to introduce you to George Raft, the childhood friend who became a movie star and opened doors that Siegel, despite all his money and all his menace, could never quite walk through on his own. We are going to introduce you to Virginia Hill, the woman who would become, by the end of this series, nearly as central to the mystery of his death as Siegel himself. And we are going to take you to a stalled hotel construction site on the edge of a quiet desert town, owned by a nightclub publisher who had gambled away the money to finish it. Popular history will tell you that Benjamin Siegel looked at that site and saw the future of Las Vegas. The truth is considerably stranger and considerably more interesting. He didn't build it, he took it. Las Vegas still tells the story the easy way. A visionary, an empty desert. A man who saw the future and built it with nothing but nerve. It is a better story than the truth. It is just not the true one. The true one starts on a pushcart-lined street in Brooklyn with an 11-year-old boy who had already figured out, long before anyone called him Bugsy, long before any of this happened, exactly how to make people pay for their own protection from a threat he had invented himself. Everything that came after was the same trick, played at a much, much larger scale. His name was Benjamin Siegel. History remembers him as Bugsy. Las Vegas remembers him as a founder. For the next 4 episodes, we are going to show you who he actually was, not the legend. The boy from Williamsburg who never stopped running the same con, all the way to the very end.